The Kansas sun hung in the sky like a molten coin, its rays beating down mercilessly upon the dusty trail that wound between Larned and Rock Hollow. June of 1879 had arrived with a vengeance, turning the prairie into a furnace where even the grasshoppers fell silent in the midday heat. The road stretched empty for miles, save for the occasional tumbleweed that rolled across like a lost soul seeking shade. It was on this desolate stretch that she collapsed, her body crumpling into the red dust as if her bones had suddenly turned to water. She wore what had once been a gray traveling dress, now torn at the hem and stained with sweat and dirt. Her boots, cracked and worn through at the soles, bore witness to countless miles traveled on foot. Blood had dried dark on her stockings where the leather had rubbed her ankles raw. One hand clutched a small canvas bag to her chest even as consciousness fled, while the other lay palm up in the dust, fingers curled like a dying bird. Her straw hat had blown free when she fell, tumbling away on the hot wind until it caught on a scraggly mesquite bush 20 yards distant. Without its meager protection, the sun began its cruel work on her exposed face and neck. Her auburn hair, once perhaps pinned neat, now spread around her head in the dirt like spilled wine. The crows came first, as they always did. 3 of them, black as char against the bleached sky. Circling lower with each pass, they had seen this before, another traveler claimed by the unforgiving land. They perched on a nearby fence post, heads cocked, waiting with the patience of creatures that knew death's schedule well. She had no name here, no history that the prairie cared to know. She was simply another body in the dust, another story ending before it could be told. Her lips, cracked and bleeding, moved slightly as if trying to form words, but no sound emerged. A thin line of spittle had dried at the corner of her mouth. The canvas bag she protected even in unconsciousness was pitifully small, its contents shifting slightly as her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths. Whatever she owned in this world, whatever she was running toward or from, it all fit in that modest bundle. Time moved strangely in the heat. Minutes or hours might have passed. The sun tracked its arc across the cloudless sky, and her skin began to redden and blister where it was exposed. The crows grew bolder, hopping closer, their sharp eyes fixed on the still form. It was the dust cloud that announced his arrival before the sound of hooves reached across the flat land. A small herd of cattle appeared first, maybe 30 head, their hides dusty brown and black, moving with the slow persistence of animals who knew their business. They followed the trail loosely, some wandering to crop at the sparse grass along the edges. Behind them rode a lone figure, straight-backed despite the heat, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadows across his face. His horse, a paint mare with one blue eye, picked her way carefully among the cattle, responsive to the slightest shift of her rider's weight. Colt Marlowe had been driving cattle since before the sun came up, planning to reach the water at Ash Creek before the worst heat of the afternoon. At 28, he had the lean, weathered look of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than roofs. His hands, gloved in worn leather, held the reins with easy confidence while his eyes tracked his small herd. He saw the crows first, circling something in the road ahead. His jaw tightened. Could be a dead calf, though he'd counted his stock not an hour ago. Could be a coyote, caught by sickness or injury. But as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made him pull up short. A woman, face down in the dirt, unmoving. For a moment, he sat frozen in his saddle. Out here, finding bodies wasn't unheard of. Travelers who'd run out of water, folks who'd met with mishap or worse. The smart thing was to keep riding, report it in town, let someone else handle the grim business. But something about the smallness of her form, the way her hand still clutched that bag, made him swing down from his horse. The cattle, sensing the change in routine, began to mill about, lowing softly. "Easy, Belle," he murmured to his mare, ground-tying her with practiced ease. His spurs clinked softly as he approached the still figure, one hand instinctively checking the Colt .45 at his hip. Could be a trap. He'd heard of such things. though this far from anywhere seemed an unlikely spot for ambush. The crows scattered at his approach, cawing their displeasure. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 20 or so. Though the sun and hardship had already begun their aging work, he knelt beside her, pulling off one glove, and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse, faint but steady. "Miss." His voice came out rougher than intended, hoarse from the dust and disuse. He'd been alone on the trail for 3 days, hadn't spoken to anything but his horse and cattle. No response. He could see now that her lips were badly cracked, bleeding in places. Dehydration, heat sickness, he'd seen it before. Gently, he rolled her onto her back, noting how her arms remained locked around that canvas bag even unconscious. Her face was flushed red with sunburn, and he could see the telltale salt lines where sweat had dried. How long had she been walking? Where had she come from? The nearest town was 15 miles back, and there was nothing ahead but Rock Hollow, still 8 miles distant. He retrieved his canteen from his saddle, the leather warm but the water inside still relatively cool. Supporting her head with one hand, he dribbled a small amount between her lips. Most of it ran down her chin, but he saw her throat work slightly, swallowing by instinct. "That's it," he said quietly, giving her a bit more. Too much too fast would make her sick. He knew. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. He sat back on his heels, considering. He couldn't leave her here. The crows had made their intentions clear enough, but taking her with him meant complications he didn't need. A man traveling alone with an unconscious woman would raise eyebrows, start tongues wagging. He'd built his reputation in Rock Hollow as a man who minded his own business, kept to himself, caused no trouble. But looking at her lying there, something twisted in his chest. She reminded him of... No, he wouldn't think about that. The past was buried, and it would stay that way. Decision made. He pulled his kerchief from his pocket, wet it from the canteen, and gently wiped the dust from her face. She stirred slightly at the touch, a small sound escaping her throat, pain or relief. He couldn't tell. The cattle had wandered off the trail, seeking what shade they could find. They'd have to wait. He whistled sharply, and Belle trotted over, well-trained and patient. "We've got an extra passenger," he told the mare, who flickered her ears in response. The challenge would be getting the woman onto the horse without dropping her or that bag she seemed to prize above her own life. In the end, he managed it by lifting her like a child, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She weighed less than a yearling calf, all bones and thin muscle. He settled her across his saddle, then swung up behind her, arranging her so she leaned back against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder. The canvas bag remained clutched to her chest. He didn't try to take it. With one arm around her waist to keep her steady, he gathered the reins in his free hand and clicked to Belle. The mare stepped out carefully, as if understanding her burden was precious. The cattle, seeing the horse moving, began to drift back toward the trail. 8 miles to Rock Hollow. 8 miles with a stranger's weight against his chest, her hair tickling his chin when the wind stirred it. 8 miles to figure out what in blazes he was going to do with her once they got there. He'd been alone for 2 years now, ever since. Well, since. His cabin sat a mile outside town, far enough for privacy but close enough for supplies when needed. Just him and his old dog, Dusty, and that was how he liked it. No complications, no entanglements, no risk of... The woman made a small sound, her head turning slightly against his shoulder. In sleep or unconsciousness, he couldn't tell which. Her face had lost some of its tension, making her look younger still. What was she running from? Because sure as sunrise, she was running. Nobody ended up collapsed on the prairie road in worn-out shoes and torn clothes unless they were fleeing something. The sun tracked lower as they traveled, the heat beginning to lose its knife edge. Belle's steady pace ate up the miles while the cattle strung out behind, following out of habit more than herding. Colt found himself checking the woman's breathing, feeling the rise and fall of her ribs against his arm. still steady, still fighting. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured, not expecting answer. "Whatever you're running from, you made it this far." The first buildings of Rock Hollow appeared as dark shapes against the horizon. Colt felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with returning to civilization. Even such as it was, decisions would have to be made soon. Take her to Doc Murphy to the boarding house. Both options meant questions, meant involving others in whatever story this woman carried. Or... He looked down at her face, peaceful now despite the sunburn and dried blood on her lips. His cabin was closer than town, and he had basic medical supplies. He could at least get her out of the sun, get water in her, tend the worst of her injuries. Let her wake up somewhere safe, then figure out the rest. It wasn't the smart choice, but then again, stopping for her in the first place hadn't been smart either. "Looks like you're coming home with me," he said softly, turning Belle off the main trail toward the path that led to his place. The cattle, confused by the change, milled about before following. Behind them, the crows had returned to the spot where she'd fallen, pecking at the dust as if searching for whatever part of her she'd left behind. But she was gone now, carried away from that place of ending, towards something that might, just might, be a beginning. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, erasing her footprints from the trail as if she'd never walked that desperate road at all. The path to Colt's cabin wound through scrub brush and scattered cottonwoods, barely wide enough for a wagon. Belle picked her way carefully, mindful of her double burden, while the cattle spread out behind them, some already breaking off toward familiar grazing spots. The woman stirred against his chest, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her fingers tightened on the canvas bag, knuckles white with effort even in her unconscious state. Colt adjusted his hold, trying to cushion her against the worst of Belle's movement. "Easy there," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. Almost home. Home. The word sat strange on his tongue. The cabin had been shelter, refuge, hiding place. But home, that was something else entirely, something he'd lost the right to claim. The structure came into view as they crested a small rise weathered wood and adobe, built sturdy against prairie winds, with a covered porch running the length of the front. Smoke still wisped from the chimney. He'd banked the fire that morning, habit born of years living alone. Dusty appeared from beneath the porch, tail wagging despite his arthritic hips. The old yellow dog had been his only companion these 2 years, loyal and unquestioning. Now the animal stopped short, nose lifted, scenting the stranger. "It's all right, boy," Colt called softly. "We've got company." He reined Belle to a stop near the porch steps, considering his next challenge. Getting the woman down without jarring her would be tricky. In the end, he dismounted first, then reached up to lift her from the saddle. She came into his arms, boneless as a rag doll. The canvas bag still clutched tight. Dusty circled them, whining low in his throat, uncertain. The dog hadn't seen another person at the cabin since... "Open," Colt commanded, nodding toward the door. Dusty, well-trained despite his age, nosed the latch up and pushed the door inward. The cabin's interior was simple but clean, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A curtained doorway led to the small bedroom, another to a lean-to kitchen. Everything exactly as he'd left it that morning, yet somehow different now with this unconscious woman in his arms. He carried her to the bedroom, laying her gently on the narrow bed. The quilts were worn but clean, his mother's work, one of the few things he'd kept. The woman's face stood out pale against the dark fabric, except where the sun had burned her skin angry red. First things first, water. He fetched a basin from the kitchen, filling it from the ceramic jug he kept cool in the corner. Clean cloths from the shelf, the cake of lye soap he'd bought last month. His medical supplies were basic but sufficient: bandages, iodine, willow bark for fever. Living alone meant being prepared. Returning to the bedroom, he found her exactly as he'd left her. save that Dusty had crept in and lay beside the bed. Guard dog instincts overcoming uncertainty. Good boy. Colt approved, setting his supplies on the small bedside table. Now came the delicate part. He needed to assess her injuries, but propriety demanded restraint. Even unconscious, even in dire need, she deserved dignity. He started with her feet, unlacing the ruined boots with careful fingers. Her stockings were more holes than fabric, and beneath, his jaw tightened. Her feet were a mess of blisters and raw flesh, some wounds fresh, others trying to heal. She'd been walking for days, maybe longer, working as gently as possible. He cleaned each foot, applied iodine despite knowing the sting would be fierce when she woke, and wrapped them in clean bandages. Her ankles bore deep marks where the boots had rubbed, and higher up, visible through the torn stockings. Bruises in the shape of fingers marked her calves. Someone had grabbed her, hard. Colt's hands stilled. He knew the marks of violence, had seen enough in his years working cattle towns, but knowing and seeing it on this small, defenseless woman were two different things. Anger, unexpected and hot, flared in his chest. He moved to her hands next, prying them gently from the canvas bag. Her fingers didn't want to release, even unconscious, and he finally gave up. Working around it, her palms were scraped raw, fingernails torn and dirty. Defensive wounds, maybe, or from falling, catching herself. Her face needed tending too. He wrung out a cloth in cool water and gently cleaned away the dust and dried blood. Her lips were badly chapped, split in several places. Sunburn covered her cheeks and forehead, already beginning to blister in spots. As he worked, she began to stir. Small movements at first, fingers twitching, head turning slightly on the pillow. Then her breathing changed, quickened. He sat back, not wanting to frighten her when she woke. Her eyes opened suddenly, wildly, green as spring grass, wide with terror. For a moment she lay frozen, then erupted into motion, scrambling backward on the bed, hitting the wall, hands clawing for escape. Easy. Colt held up both hands, palms out, backing away from the bed. You're safe. You're safe. She didn't seem to hear him, eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out save a raw, gasping breath. The canvas bag pressed against her chest like a shield. My name's Colt Marlowe, he said, keeping his voice low, steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. You collapsed on the trail. I brought you to my cabin. You're safe here. Her eyes fixed on him, still wild but beginning to focus. She tried to speak again, managed only a hoarse croak. One hand went to her throat. Water, he asked. I'll get you water, but you need to stay calm. You're hurt bad, and moving will make it worse. He rose slowly, telegraphing every movement, and poured water from the pitcher into a tin cup. When he turned back, she'd pressed herself into the corner where wall met wall, knees drawn up, that bag clutched tight. I'm going to set this on the table here, he said, placing the cup on the bedside table. You drink when you're ready. I'll be in the other room. He backed out of the bedroom, pulling the curtain partway closed. In the main room, he sank into one of the chairs, running a hand over his face. Dusty padded out to lean against his leg, tail wagging uncertainly. I know, boy, Colt muttered. What have I gotten us into? From the bedroom came sounds of movement, then the clink of the tin cup. Good. She was drinking. After a long moment, he heard her feet hit the floor, heard her sharp intake of breath. The bandages wouldn't cushion much. She appeared in the doorway like a ghost, one hand braced against the frame, the other still clutching that bag. Standing, she was smaller than he'd thought, maybe 5'2", swimming in that torn dress. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled and matted. Where? Her voice was barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper. Where am I? About a mile outside Rock Hollow, he answered, staying seated, trying to appear non-threatening. Kansas Territory, my cabin. She swayed slightly, and he tensed to catch her if she fell, but she steadied herself through will alone. I need to... She gestured vaguely toward the door. I need to go. Ma'am, you can barely stand. Your feet are cut to ribbons, your son's sick, and you haven't had real food or water in Lord knows how long. He kept his tone reasonable. Matter of fact, whatever you're running from, it'll still be there tomorrow. Tonight, you need rest. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, certainly, but also a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to drag at her where she stood. Her gaze darted to the door, measuring distances, calculating chances. I'm not keeping you here, Colt added quietly. Door's not locked, but if you try to walk on those feet, you won't make it a quarter mile, and there's nothing out there but prairie and coyotes until you hit town. She absorbed this, still swaying slightly. Dusty chose that moment to approach her, tail wagging low, and sniff at her skirts. She flinched back, then seemed to realize the old dog meant no harm. One scraped hand dropped to touch his head briefly. He won't hurt you, Colt said unnecessarily. Nothing here will hurt you. A bitter sound that might have been a laugh escaped her. That's what they all say. Maybe so, but I'm not them, whoever them is. He stood slowly, moving to the stove. I'm going to heat some broth. You need food. You can eat it or not. Trust it or not, your choice. He busied himself at the stove, giving her space to decide. Behind him, he heard her move, not toward the door but to the empty chair. The scrape of wood on wood as she pulled it out. The soft thump of the canvas bag set on the table. When he turned back with the bowl of beef broth, she was sitting hunched over, head in her hands, trembling. He realized. Full body shakes that had nothing to do with cold. He set the bowl before her and retreated to his own chair. Shock, he said quietly. Your body's catching up to what you've been through. The shaking will pass. She raised her head to look at him, those green eyes swimming with unshed tears. Why? The word came out cracked. Why did you stop? It was a fair question. Out here, people minded their own business, looked after their own interests. Stopping for a stranger, especially a woman in trouble, meant complications. Couldn't leave you for the crows, he said simply. She flinched at that, understanding exactly what he meant. Her hands, still shaking, reached for the spoon. The first sip of broth brought tears to her eyes. Relief or pain? He couldn't tell. Maybe both. They sat in silence while she ate. Slow, careful sips, her body gradually remembering what food was. Dusty settled between them. A furry bridge across the awkward distance. Outside, dusk was falling, painting the prairie in shades of purple and gold. I can't pay you, she said suddenly, setting down the empty bowl. I have nothing to pay you with. Didn't ask for payment. Men always want payment. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. One kind or another. Colt felt anger rise again. Hot and unfamiliar after 2 years of feeling mostly nothing. What had been done to this woman to put that dead certainty in her voice? Some men, maybe, he conceded. Not this one. You'll sleep in the bedroom tonight. I'll bed down out here. Come morning, if you're well enough to travel. I'll take you to town. Doc Murphy can look at those feet proper. And Mrs. Garrett at the boarding house is a decent woman. She'll help you figure what comes next. She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Just like that. Just like that. Her fingers found the canvas bag again, pulling it into her lap. I can't go to town. He'll find me there. He has people, money. He always finds me. So there it was. Running from a man. Colt wasn't surprised, given the bruises, the desperation that had driven her to walk until she collapsed. Then you stay here until you figure something else, he heard himself say, surprising them both. But tonight, you rest. Tomorrow's problems will keep. She looked around the cabin again, taking in details she'd missed before. His few possessions, neat and spare. The rifle over the mantel, the single plate and cup drying by the sink, evidence of his solitary life. "You live alone," she observed. "I do. No wife, no family." "No!" The word came out sharper than intended. He softened his tone. "Like I said, it's just me and Dusty here." She nodded slowly, some decision reaching behind those green eyes. "I'll stay tonight, but I'll be gone come morning. I won't bring my troubles to your door." He wanted to tell her that troubles had a way of finding doors regardless, that running on torn feet and exhaustion was no answer. But he recognized the fierce pride in her voice, the determination that had kept her walking long past when her body wanted to quit. "Fair enough," he said instead. "There's clean water in the pitcher, and I'll leave a lamp burning. You need anything in the night, you call out." She nodded, rising unsteadily. The few steps to the bedroom seemed to take enormous effort, and she paused in the doorway, looking back. "Mr. Marlowe." Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Thank you for stopping, for this." He nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Get some rest, miss." She disappeared behind the curtain. He heard the bed creak as she settled. Still fully dressed, he imagined. Still clutching that bag like a lifeline. Colt sat in the gathering darkness, Dusty at his feet, listening to the night sounds beyond the walls. Cattle lowing in the distance, coyotes calling to each other across the prairie, and from the bedroom, gradually, the deep breathing of exhausted sleep. He'd told himself he was done with complications, done with caring about anything beyond his cattle and his solitude. But here he sat, playing host to a nameless woman with fear in her eyes and violence in her past. "Come morning." She'd try to leave. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the desperate pride that kept her spine straight even as her body betrayed her. She'd walk on those ruined feet until she collapsed again, somewhere out on the prairie where no one would stop. Unless he gave her a reason to stay, unless he convinced her that here, in this simple cabin with its simple routines, she might find what she was really looking for, not just escape from whatever pursued her, but a place to rest, to heal, to remember what it felt like to be safe. It was a dangerous thought. He'd built these walls, wood and adobe and emotional distance, for good reason. Letting her in, even temporarily, risked everything he'd worked to forget. But remembering her weight in his arms, the way she'd fought unconsciousness to protect that pathetic bag, the bruises that marked her skin. Colt rose and quietly checked that the door was barred, that the rifle above the mantel was loaded and ready. Old habits, but they served. Whatever had driven her to near death on the prairie road might follow. Best to be prepared. Then he made his bed on the floor near the fireplace, using his saddle for a pillow as he'd done countless nights on the trail. Dusty curled up beside him, warm and familiar. "In the bedroom," she cried out once in her sleep, a sound of fear that had him half rising before she settled again. Whatever dreams found her, he hoped they were kinder than her waking hours had been. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light through the windows, and Colt Marlowe, who'd sworn off complications and human connections and anything that might crack the careful shell he'd built around his heart, lay awake, listening to a stranger's breathing and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Dawn came slowly to the prairie, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Colt woke as he always did, just before first light, body trained by years of ranch work. For a moment, lying on the hard floor with Dusty pressed against his side, he forgot about his unexpected guest. Then he heard movement from the bedroom, the creak of floorboards, a sharp intake of breath. She was trying to leave. He rose quietly, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping on the floor. Through the window, he could see her silhouette on the porch, one hand braced against the wall, the other clutching that ever-present bag. She'd made it perhaps 3 steps before her legs gave out. Colt found her sitting on the porch steps, face white with pain, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Her feet, despite the bandages, had started bleeding again. "Going somewhere?" he asked mildly, settling beside her on the step. Not too close. He'd learned she spooked easy. She didn't answer, just stared out at the landscape emerging from shadow. The morning air was cool, almost cold, and she shivered in her torn dress. "I have to go," she whispered finally. "Before he finds me, before I bring trouble here." "Ma'am, you couldn't make it to the well, much less wherever you think you're going." He kept his voice gentle but firm. "Those feet need at least a week to heal enough for walking." "A week?" The panic in her voice was sharp. "I can't. A week is too long. He'll find me." "Who is he?" She shook her head violently, auburn hair whipping around her face. "It doesn't matter. You don't understand. He has money, connections. When he wants something—" "This is my land," Colt said quietly. "My home. Man wants to come here causing trouble. He'll find it." She turned to look at him then. Really look at him. In the growing light, he could see her face properly, younger than he'd thought. Maybe 22 or 3, with fine bones under the sunburn and exhaustion. But her eyes were old, had seen too much. "You don't know him," she said, "what he's capable of." "Maybe not, but I know myself, and I don't run from bullies." Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or a hope so fragile she didn't dare acknowledge it. She looked away, fingers worrying at the canvas bag's drawstring. "I should at least tell you my name," she said after a long moment. If I'm staying, even for a few days, it's—" She paused, as if the word itself was dangerous. "Lena, my name is Lena." Lena. He tried the name, found it suited her. "Well, Lena, pleased to make your acquaintance. Now, let's get you back inside before you catch a chill." She tried to stand on her own, stubborn pride flaring, but her legs wouldn't hold. Without asking permission, knowing she'd refuse, Colt scooped her up, carried her back into the cabin. She weighed nothing. Bird bones and determination. This time, when he set her in the chair, she didn't flinch away. Progress of a sort. "I'll make breakfast," he said, moving to the stove. "And then we need to talk about those feet. They need proper cleaning again, fresh bandages." "I can do it myself," she said quickly. "Can you reach your own feet right now? Can you see the damage on your heels?" He didn't wait for an answer. Pride's all well and good, but infection will kill you just as dead as whatever you're running from. She subsided, watching warily as he heated water, gathered supplies. When he knelt before her chair with the basin, she tensed but didn't pull away. "This will hurt," he warned, beginning to unwrap the bloodied bandages. It did hurt. He could see it in the white lines around her mouth, the way her hands clenched on the chair arms, but she made no sound beyond a few sharp breaths. Tough, this one. Had to be, to survive whatever had driven her here. The wounds looked worse in daylight. Deep blisters, some burst and weeping, cuts from stones, the kind of damage that came from walking far past the point of pain, when the body simply stopped registering new hurt. He worked in silence, cleaning each wound with careful attention, applying fresh iodine. She hissed at the sting but held still. When he glanced up, she was staring at his hands, something unreadable in her expression. "You're gentle," she said, sounding surprised. "No point being otherwise." "Most men—" She stopped, shook her head. He finished wrapping her feet in clean bandages, then rose, knees protesting. "Most men aren't worth knowing," he said simply. "Now, breakfast." She ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food might be snatched away. Biscuits and gravy. Nothing fancy, but she savored each bite. That canvas bag sat in her lap, never out of reach. "What's in the bag?" he asked finally, curiosity winning over manners. Her hand tightened on it reflexively. Then, surprising him, she loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents onto the table. Pathetically little. A broken comb, a small wrapped bundle that might be food, a man's pocket watch, the chain broken, and a photograph, water-stained and creased. She picked up the photograph, holding it so he couldn't see the image. "My mother?" she said softly. "She died when I was 15. This is all I have left of her." "I'm sorry." She shrugged, trying for indifference and missing. "It was a long time ago. After she died, my father changed, started drinking more, started owing money to the wrong people. When he couldn't pay, he found another way to settle the debt." Colt's jaw tightened, understanding where this was going. "Mr. Jacob Harrison," she continued, voice flat, "owns half the county back in Missouri. Cattle, land, more money than God. My father promised him a wife. Young, obedient, grateful for the honor." Her laugh was bitter. "I tried to be grateful, tried to be what they wanted, but when I saw what kind of man he really was." She stopped, fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. "You ran," Colt finished. "I ran 3 weeks ago, made it to Independence, thought I could lose myself in the city. But his men found me, ran again, caught a freight wagon heading west. When they got close again, I left the wagon, started walking." She gestured at her feet. "You see how that ended?" "This Harrison, he hurt you?" The question came out rougher than intended. She looked away. "Does it matter I'm his property, bought and paid for? The law won't help me. No one will help me. All I can do is keep running until what? You collapse somewhere with no one to find you. You starve. You die of thirst." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "That's no kind of plan." "It's the only plan I have." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. He won't stop. He can't stand being defied, especially by a woman. He'll hunt me down like an animal. And when he finds me—" She was shaking again, that full-body tremor he'd seen the night before. Colt moved without thinking, kneeling beside her chair, not touching but close enough she could feel his presence. "He won't find you here," he said firmly. "This cabin's not on any maps. Townfolk know to leave me be. You're safe here, Lena, for as long as you need." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. I'm nothing to you." He thought about lying, making up some noble reason. But she deserved truth. "Maybe because I know what it's like to run, to need a place to stop, catch your breath, remember who you are beyond the fear." She studied his face, seeing something there that made her eyes widen slightly. "You're hiding too?" "Not a question." He nodded slowly. "Different reasons, but yes." They sat in silence for a moment. Two damaged souls recognizing each other across the divide of their separate sorrows. Then Dusty, with the timing of a creature who lived for simple comforts, pushed between them, tail wagging, demanding attention. The tension broke. Lena actually smiled, just a small thing, there and gone, but real. She scratched behind the dog's ears, and he groaned in pleasure. "He likes you," Colt observed. "I always wanted a dog. Father said they were useless creatures, just another mouth to feed." Her hand stilled on Dusty's head. "I suppose he was right. I'm just another mouth to feed, too." "Stop that!" The sharpness in his voice made her flinch. He gentled his tone. "You're a person, not livestock. You have worth beyond what others can use you for." "Pretty words," she murmured. "But the world doesn't work that way." "My world does. My land, my rules." He stood. Decision made. "You'll stay until you're healed. After that, we'll figure out what comes next. Maybe there's somewhere far enough even Harrison can't reach. California, maybe Oregon territory." She looked startled. He hadn't meant to say that. You'll need help getting there. Supplies, transportation. I know people. Can arrange things. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He moved to the door, uncomfortable with the emotion thickening the air. I need to check the cattle. Make sure they haven't wandered too far. You rest. There's books on the shelf if you get bored. And Dusty'll keep you company. Mr. Marlowe. He paused at the door. Thank you. I know that's not enough, but thank you. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and escaped into the morning sun. The cattle had indeed wandered, spreading across the grassland in search of better grazing. He spent the next hours rounding them up, grateful for the familiar work, the simple problems that could be solved with rope and sweat and stubbornness. But his mind kept drifting back to the cabin, to the woman sitting at his table with her pitiful possessions and her wealth of pain. Lena. Even her name sounded fragile, like something that might break if handled roughly. He'd meant what he said. She could stay as long as needed, but he knew himself well enough to recognize the danger in that offer. 2 years he'd kept his heart locked away, frozen in the moment of his greatest loss. Now, this slip of a girl with green eyes and bleeding feet threatened to thaw what he'd worked so hard to keep cold. When he returned at midday, he found her asleep in the chair, head pillowed on her arms at the table. The photograph lay beside her hand, and he glimpsed it properly for the first time. A woman who might have been Lena in 20 years. Same auburn hair, same determined chin. Gently, careful not to wake her, he lifted her again, carried her to the bedroom. This time he removed her shoes, or what was left of them, and covered her with one of his mother's quilts. She murmured something in her sleep, turning into the pillow. Back in the main room, he picked up the photograph, studying it more closely. On the back, in faded ink, Margaret O'Brien, 1867, Lena O'Brien, then Irish. That explained the auburn hair, the stubborn streak, the way she held her suffering close and quiet. He replaced the photograph with her other possessions, then settled at the table with his ledgers, trying to focus on numbers and plans. But his gaze kept drifting to the bedroom doorway, to the sound of her breathing, peaceful now in sleep. What had he done, bringing her here? What had he promised? Offering to help her reach California, he was a man who'd learned the hard way that caring for someone meant risking everything. Better to stay alone, safe in solitude. But remembering the hope that had flickered in her eyes when he'd said she could stay, the surprise in her voice when she'd called him gentle. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe saving her was really about saving himself, about proving he could still be the man he'd been before loss carved him hollow. Either way, she was here now, under his roof, under his protection, and God help anyone, Harrison or otherwise, who tried to take her before she was ready to go. The afternoon stretched quiet and peaceful. Dusty dozed by the cold fireplace. The cattle grazed beyond the windows. And in the bedroom, Lena slept on, safe for the first time in weeks. Her photograph clutched loose in one hand like a talisman against the dark. 3 days passed in a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Lena's feet began to heal, the angry red fading to pink, new skin forming over the worst of the wounds. She moved carefully around the cabin, learning its corners and comforts, always with that canvas bag within reach. Colt maintained his routines, tending cattle, mending fence, the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running, but found himself returning to the cabin more often than necessary. Just checking, he told himself, making sure she hadn't tried to leave again. On the 3rd evening, he came back to find her at the stove, stirring something that smelled of sage and onion. She'd found his mother's apron somewhere, tied it around her thin waist. The sight stopped him in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning, somehow sensing his presence. "You've been feeding me for days. Thought I should return the favor. You're supposed to be resting those feet. They're much better. See," she turned, lifting her skirt slightly to show the neat bandages. I rewrapped them myself this morning, and sitting around makes me feel useless. He hung his hat on the peg, washed his hands in the basin. The domestic normalcy of it all felt dangerous, like walking on spring ice. What are you making? Rabbit stew. Dusty caught one this morning. Brought it right to the porch. Seemed proud of himself. She smiled. A real smile that transformed her face. I haven't cooked rabbit in years. Mother used to make it with wild onions and prairie sage. They ate in comfortable silence. Dusty positioned hopefully between their chairs. The stew was good. Better than anything Colt had managed in 2 years of bachelor cooking. He found himself watching her across the table, noting how the lamplight caught the copper in her hair, how her movements had lost some of their desperate edge. After dinner, she insisted on washing dishes while he dried, standing hip to hip at the small counter. Such a simple thing, sharing chores, but it stirred something in his chest he'd thought long dead. Tell me about her, Lena said suddenly, hands still in the soapy water. Who? The woman you lost, the one who makes you look so sad when you think I'm not watching. Colt's hands stilled on the plate he was drying. What makes you think? This cabin was loved by a woman, she interrupted gently. The quilts, the curtains, the way the kitchen is arranged, but the dust on her things says she's been gone a while. And you have the look of a man who's been hollowed out by grief. He set the plate down carefully, gripping the edge of the counter. No one had asked him about Sarah in 2 years. No one in Rock Hollow even knew her name. Her name was Sarah, he heard himself say. My wife. She died 2 years ago. Fever took her, along with... He stopped, couldn't voice the rest. Your child. Lena's voice was soft, understanding. He nodded, not trusting speech. The baby had lived 3 days, just long enough for them to name her Rose, to fall in love with her tiny fingers and dark hair like her mother's. I'm sorry. Lena dried her hands, turned to face him fully. That kind of loss, it changes you, makes you a stranger to yourself. Yes, the word came out rough. After they died, I couldn't stay in Texas. Too many memories. Came here, bought this land sight unseen. Just needed somewhere empty. And then I showed up. There was regret in her voice. Bringing my troubles to your sanctuary. Maybe it was time, he said slowly. Can't hide from the world forever. She studied his face in the lamplight. Can't you? Before he could answer, Dusty erupted in warning barks, hackles raised. Colt moved instantly to the window, hand finding the rifle he'd started keeping by the door. Outside, darkness had fallen complete, but he could hear it now. Horses, several of them. Get in the bedroom, he ordered, checking the rifle's load. Bar the door. Lena had gone white, but she moved without argument, pausing only to grab her precious bag. The bedroom door closed with a solid thunk. Colt stepped onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands but ready. The riders materialized from the darkness. 4 men, travel-worn and hard-faced. The leader, a thin man with pale eyes, touched his hat brim. Evening. Looking for someone. Wondering if you might have seen her. His voice carried the flat twang of Missouri. Young woman, red hair, about yay-high, runaway, family's worried sick. Haven't seen anyone like that. Colt lied easily. Don't get many visitors out here. The pale-eyed man smiled, and it was like watching a snake uncoil. That's O.C. We tracked her to Rock Hollow, and folks there said you were acting strange when you came through for supplies yesterday. Buying women's things, cloth for bandages. Man can't buy supplies without answering questions. When a man who's lived alone for 2 years suddenly needs ladies' soap, people notice. The smile widened. Mind if we look around just to ease our minds? I do mind. Colt shifted slightly, letting lamplight catch on the rifle's barrel. This is private property. You're not welcome here. The other riders spread slightly, hands drifting toward weapons. Colt counted odds, angles, Noted the one on the left favored his right side. Old injury? Probably. Now, no need for unpleasantness. Pale Eyes said, "Mister, Harrison just wants his property back. The girl's not right in the head, you understand. Makes up wild stories. Needs protecting from herself. Seems to me if she ran this far, she had good reason." The friendly mask slipped. "You're harboring a fugitive, a woman who belongs to another man. That's theft in any court." "Women aren't property," Colt said quietly. "Not in Kansas. We fought a war about owning people, if you recall." "Different situation entirely. She's promised, contracted. Her daddy took money for her. Fair and square." "Then her daddy's the thief, not her." Pale Eyes studied him for a long moment. "You're making a mistake, friend, Mr. Harrison's not a man to cross. He has resources, connections. This doesn't have to end badly for you." "It's already ended. You're leaving now." "And if we don't?" Colt worked the rifle's lever, the sound sharp in the night air. "Then we find out how badly you want to die for another man's pride." Tension stretched between them, tight as wire. One of the younger riders shifted nervously, hand twitching toward his pistol. Colt marked him as the one who'd break first if shooting started. Then Pale Eyes laughed, soft and unpleasant. "Have it your way. But this isn't over, Mr. Harrison doesn't forget, and neither do I." He wheeled his horse, the others following. They disappeared into the darkness, but Colt waited, listening until the hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he lower the rifle. "Lena, they're gone." The bedroom door opened slowly. She stood there trembling, face wet with tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've brought this to your door, just like I said I would." "Hey." He crossed to her, stopping just short of touching. "You didn't bring anything. They did. This is on them, not you. You don't understand. He'll come back, with more men, with the law, with whatever it takes. I should go. Tonight. Before—" "Nobody's going anywhere tonight." He kept his voice calm, steady. "They know you're here now. You leave, they'll catch you within miles. Your only chance is to stay put. Let me handle this." "Handle it how you can't fight them all." "Won't have to." He moved to the table, pulled out paper and ink. "I've got friends too. Maybe not as rich as Harrison, but good men who remember favors owed. Time to call some in." She watched him write, addressing letters to men in Dodge City, Abilene, even Denver, former Rangers. Mostly men he'd ridden with before Sarah, before he'd thought settling down was possible. "This won't work," she said quietly. "Men like Harrison always win. They have the money, the power." "They have fear," Colt interrupted. "That's all. Take away the fear, and they're just bullies playing at being important." He sealed the first letter. "I'll ride to town at first light. Send these telegraphs. Meanwhile, we prepare." "Prepare how?" He looked at her, standing there in his mother's apron with tear tracks on her face, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. "First, you learn to shoot." Her eyes widened. I've never—" "Then it's time you did. Man like Harrison counts on women being helpless. Time to prove him wrong." He stood, energy flowing through him for the first time in 2 years. "But first, we need to move some things around. They'll be back, probably with the sheriff. Need to make sure they don't find anything they can use." They worked together through the night, hiding anything that might be construed as women's things, moving Lena's few possessions to the root cellar. She proved quick and clever, understanding without explanation what needed doing. As dawn approached, she made coffee while he saddled Belle. "What if they come while you're gone?" "They won't. Too sure of themselves to move that fast. But just in case." He handed her a small revolver, a .32 he'd bought for Sarah, but she'd never learned to use. "It's loaded. Anyone tries to force their way in. You shoot first and feel bad about it later." She took the gun gingerly, as if it might bite.
I don't know if I could actually.
You walked until your feet bled rather than submit to him, he said quietly. You've got more steel in you than you know. Trust it. She looked at the gun, then at him. Something shifted in her expression. A settling, a decision made. All right, but you be careful in town. Harrison might have men there too. I'll be fine. You just keep that door barred until you hear my voice. He paused at the door, looking back. Lena, whatever happens, you made the right choice. Running, fighting. Don't let anyone tell you different. She nodded, clutching the revolver. And as he rode out into the morning light, Colt realized he meant every word. She had made the right choice. And so, perhaps had he... The sun climbed higher as he made for town, Belle moving steady beneath him. Behind, the cabin sat solid and quiet, smoke rising from the chimney. Inside, a woman with green eyes and wounded feet waited, trusted, began to hope. It wasn't love. Not yet. Too soon for that. Too much pain on both sides. But it was something. A beginning. A chance. And sometimes, Colt thought as Rock Hollow appeared in the distance, that was enough to build on. Sometimes a chance was all you needed to change everything. The telegraph office was just opening when he arrived, and by the time the sun reached its zenith, messages were flying across the wires, calling in old debts and older friendships, the kind of men Jacob Harrison's money couldn't buy, the kind of men who understood that some things were worth fighting for, even if you'd only known them for 3 days. Especially then. Rock Hollow came alive with whispers the moment Colt tied Belle to the post outside the telegraph office. Faces appeared at windows. Conversations halted mid-sentence. In a town of 300 souls, secrets traveled faster than prairie fire. Inside the telegraph office, Walter Jennings looked up from his desk, spectacles sliding down his nose. Marlowe, haven't seen you in here since... He caught himself, cleared his throat. What can I do for you? Colt handed over the messages, written in his careful hand. Need these sent immediately. All of them. Walter's eyes widened as he read the addresses. Jim Thornton in Dodge Blackjack Mackenzie and Abilene Colt. These are... old friends. Just send them. Walter, quick as you can. The telegraph key began its rapid clicking. While Walter worked, Colt became aware of a presence in the doorway. Tom Garrett from the Mercantile, trying to look casual. Heard you had visitors last night, Tom said, voice carefully neutral. News travels fast. 4 men asking questions about a red-headed woman. Same men were in my store yesterday, flashing money around, making threats. Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. Also heard you might be harboring said woman. Colt met his gaze steadily. You hear a lot of things, Tom. I do. Also heard this woman might be running from Jacob Harrison out of Missouri. Man who owns judges like I own chickens. Tom glanced around, then leaned in. My Martha says any woman running from a man like that probably has good cause. Says we ought to mind our own business if someone's giving her shelter. Martha's a wise woman. She is, which is why I'm telling you, Sheriff Daniels got a telegraph this morning. Official-like. He's supposed to bring you in for questioning. Tom straightened. Course, Dan's old mare went lame yesterday. Take him a while to find another mount. Maybe till afternoon. The warning was clear. Colt nodded his thanks as Walter finished the last message. Anything else? Walter asked. One more thing. Colt pulled out another paper. Need to send this to Judge Theodore Mason in Topeka. Walter read it, face going pale. This is... Colt, you're filing for protective custody, claiming the woman as your intended... Only way to buy time. Kansas law says a woman pledged to marry can't be forced back to another arrangement without her consent, even if her father made promises. Harrison won't like this, and it's only temporary unless... Walter trailed off. Unless the marriage happens, I know. Colt paid for the telegrams. Send it. Outside, more townspeople had gathered, pretending to go about their business while obviously watching Mrs. Murphy from the boarding house caught his arm as he passed. "Is it true you've got that poor girl out at your place?" "Don't know what you're talking about, ma'am." She studied him with sharp eyes. "I was young once, Mr. Marlowe, young and foolish enough to marry the first man my father chose. Took me 10 years to escape that mistake." Her grip tightened. "You need anything, food, medicine, women's clothes that actually fit, you send word. Some of us remember what it's like to be trapped." By the time Colt finished at the bank, withdrawing funds he'd hoped never to touch, half the town seemed to know his business. Some faces showed disapproval, others curiosity, but more than he'd expected showed quiet support. At the general store, he bought ammunition, flour, coffee, and, after a moment's hesitation, a simple blue dress from the ready-made section. Tom Garrett wrapped it without comment, then threw in extra medical supplies. "On the house," he said, "for whoever might need them." The sun was high when Colt started back, Bell loaded with supplies. He took a roundabout route, checking for watchers, doubling back twice, but the road stayed empty, the prairie quiet except for the eternal wind. A mile from home, he spotted the tracks. Fresh horses, several of them, circling his property before heading back toward town. They'd been watching, waiting, testing. He found Lena exactly where he'd left her, sitting at the table with the revolver before her, practicing loading and unloading it with trembling fingers. She looked up at his entrance, relief flooding her features. "You're back. I heard horses earlier. Thought—" She stood quickly. "Did you send the messages?" "Sent and received. 3 confirmations already. Jim Thornton's bringing 5 men from Dodge. They'll be here within the week." He set the packages on the table. "Also filed papers in Topeka, legal-like." "Papers?" He pulled out the copy Walter had made. "Protective custody order. Claims you as my intended bride. Only way to stop Harrison using the law against us." She went very still, color draining from her face. You claimed me." "On paper only. Buys us time. Nothing more. When this is over, we'll file dissolution papers. You'll be free to go wherever you want." He busied himself unpacking supplies, not meeting her eyes. "It's just strategy, using their own rules against them. And if they demand proof, if they insist on an actual marriage, then we deal with that when it comes." He set the blue dress before her, still wrapped. "Thought you might want something that fits proper, Mrs. Murphy offered to alter it if needed." She touched the package with wondering fingers. "I haven't had a new dress in... Thank you." Also brought news. "Sheriff's coming this afternoon. Wants to question us both." Fear flashed across her face before she controlled it. "What do I tell him?" "The truth. That you're here of your own free will. That you're engaged to marry me. That anyone trying to force you back to Missouri will have to go through legal channels." He finally met her gaze. "Can you do that lie convincing-like?" "It's not entirely a lie," she said quietly. "You've shown me more kindness in 5 days than Jacob Harrison did in all our meetings. If I had to choose a husband—" She stopped, shook her head. "I mean, I can be convincing for the sheriff." An awkward silence fell. Colt broke it by checking the rifle. Then the shutters. They were here while I was gone, circled the property, probably checking defenses. They'll be back. Then we should practice. She picked up the revolver with new determination. "You said you'd teach me to shoot." They spent the afternoon in the yard behind the cabin. Lena proved a quick study, her initial flinches giving way to steady concentration. By the dozenth shot, she was hitting the target more often than not. "You're a natural," Colt observed, watching her reload with increasing confidence. "I'm motivated." She sighted down the barrel, squeezed the trigger. The tin can jumped off the fence post. "Every time I aim, I picture his face. Is that wrong?" "Wrong or right doesn't matter much when someone's trying to hurt you. You do what you need to survive." She lowered the gun, studying him. "Is that what you did after your wife died? Whatever you needed to survive?" "I ran," he said simply. "Hid. Stopped feeling anything I didn't have to feel. Not sure that counts as survival." "You're feeling now." It wasn't a question. Before he could respond, Dusty barked warning. A lone rider approached. Sheriff Daniels, badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Lena quickly hid the revolver in her apron pocket. "Afternoon. Colt," the sheriff called, dismounting with the care of a man whose joints protested such activity. "Miss..." "Sheriff," Colt acknowledged. "Coffee?" They gathered at the kitchen table, the sheriff's presence filling the small space. Dan Daniels was a fair man, Colt knew, but he had a job to do. "I'll get right to it," Daniels said. "Got a telegraph from Jefferson City. Says you're harboring a runaway woman belongs to one Jacob Harrison. That true?" "I'm harboring no one," Colt replied evenly. "Miss O'Brien is here as my invited guest and intended bride." "That's so," Daniels turned to Lena. "Miss, I need to hear it from you. You hear of your own choosing." "I am." Her voice was steady, stronger than Colt expected. "Mr. Marlowe saved my life when I collapsed on the road. We've since discovered a mutual affection." "And this business with Harrison?" Lena lifted her chin. "My father made promises he had no right to make. I'm a free woman, sheriff, free to choose my own path, my own husband. Harrison's men say different. Say you're touched in the head, making up stories." "Then why did I run?" Fire flashed in her eyes. "Why walk until my feet bled if I was happy with the arrangement?" Daniels sighed, looking older than his 50 years. "Miss, I don't doubt you had cause, but the law's the law. Harrison's filed papers saying you're contracted to him." "And I've filed papers saying she's contracted to me," Colt interjected. "Sent to Judge Mason in Topeka this morning. Until a court sorts it out, she stays here." "You prepared to defend that position? Harrison's bringing more men, professional guns, from what I hear." "I've got friends coming too, rangers, lawmen, men who've forgotten more about fighting than Harrison's hired thugs ever learned." The sheriff absorbed this, fingers drumming on the table. "This is going to get ugly. Colt, blood ugly. Sure it's worth it for a woman you've known less than a week." Colt felt Lena tense beside him, under the table. He found her hand, squeezed it briefly. "Some things you know quick. Dan, right and wrong. Worth fighting for or not. This is worth it." Daniels stood, settled his hat. "Then I've done my duty. Questioned you both. Found no evidence of coercion. Woman says she's here willingly. That's good enough for me." He paused at the door. "But Colt, when this goes bad, and it will, I can't take sides. Badge won't let me." "Understood." After the sheriff left, they stood in silence, the weight of what was coming settling over them like dust. Lena still held his hand, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the day. "He's right," she said finally. "This is going to get people hurt, maybe killed, because of me." "Because of Harrison," Colt corrected. "His pride, his need to own what won't be owned. That's on him, not you." She turned to face him fully, green eyes searching his. "Why are you really doing this? And don't say strategy or being neighborly, not anymore." He looked at their joined hands, surprised to find himself speaking truth. "Because when I saw you in that road, something in me woke up. Something I thought died with Sarah. And maybe that's selfish, using your trouble to feel alive again. But maybe it's what we both need, a reason to fight instead of just survive." "I'm not her," Lena said softly. "I can't replace what you lost. Not asking you to, but maybe we can be something new. After the dust settles, after Harrison's dealt with. Maybe," she squeezed his hand, then let go. "Maybe is more than I've had in a long time." The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, Harrison's men were planning, scheming, preparing for war, But here, in this small cabin, two damaged souls had found something worth defending. "Show me how to clean the rifle," Lena said suddenly. "If they're coming, I want to be ready." And as Colt taught her the mechanics of survival, he realized the truth of his own words. He was feeling again. Fear, yes, and anger at those who would harm her. But underneath, growing stronger with each passing hour, something that might someday bloom into hope, maybe even into love. But first, they had a war to win. 2 weeks passed intense preparation. True to his word, Jim Thornton arrived from Dodge City with 5 hard-faced men, all former Rangers who'd ridden with Colt in younger days. They set up camp a quarter-mile from the cabin, keeping watch in shifts. "Like old times," Jim said, clasping Colt's hand. "Though I never figured you'd call us in over a woman." "It's about more than that," Colt replied, watching Lena through the window as she helped Cookie, the group's grizzled camp cook, prepare evening meal. "It's about standing up to men who think money gives them the right to own people." "Fair enough, but this Harrison fellow's got deep pockets. Word is he's hiring the Morrison brothers out of Kansas City." Colt's jaw tightened. The Morrison brothers were known manhunters, operating just inside the law. Then we'd best be ready. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. Lena's feet healed completely, and she moved about the cabin with growing confidence. She learned to shoot with both revolver and rifle, her aim improving dramatically. More importantly, she began to smile more often, the haunted look fading from her eyes. Evenings found them at the kitchen table, Colt teaching her to read maps and plan escape routes while she taught him card games her mother had known. It was during one such evening that she finally spoke the words they'd both been avoiding. "My name isn't really Lena O'Brien." Colt looked up from his coffee, unsurprised. Figured as much. O'Brien didn't seem to fit with Missouri society types. "It's Eleanor. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore." She traced patterns on the table with one finger. "My father was Joseph Whitmore. You might have heard of him. Railroad money. Lots of it. When he lost it all gambling, he needed Harrison's backing to avoid prison. I was part of the deal." "Eleanor." He tested the name. "Do you want me to call you that?" She shook her head firmly. Eleanor was a girl who did what she was told, wore what she was given, smiled when she wanted to scream. Lena. Lena fights back. Lena survives. I want to be Lena. "Then Lena you are." She smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed her face. "Tell me about Sarah. Not the sad parts. Tell me what made you love her." So he did, surprising himself with stories he hadn't let himself remember. Sarah's laugh, her terrible cooking, the way she sang to the horses, how she'd stood up to a corrupt land agent, tiny and fierce as a bantam rooster, the garden she'd planned but never got to plant. "She sounds wonderful," Lena said softly when he finished. "She was, but she's gone. And I've spent 2 years using her memory as a wall between me and the world. She would have hated that." He met Lena's eyes. "She would have liked you, would have admired your courage." Before Lena could respond, a shout from outside brought them both to their feet. One of Jim's men was riding in fast, dust clouding behind him. "They're coming," he announced, swinging down from his lathered horse. "Spotted them 5 miles out. 12 riders, moving slow but steady. Be here within the hour." The peaceful evening shattered. Men materialized from the darkness, checking weapons, taking positions. Colt strapped on his gun belt, mind shifting to tactics and angles. "Lena, get to the root cellar," he ordered. "Bar the door from inside." "No." She stood straight, chin lifted in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. "This is my fight more than anyone's. I won't hide while others risk their lives for me." "You'll do as you're told." "I'll do what's right." She pulled the revolver from her apron, checking the chambers like he'd taught her. "I'm done running. Colt, done letting others fight my battles." They glared at each other, wills clashing. Jim Thornton cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but if the lady can shoot, we could use her at one of the windows. Numbers aren't in our favor. Colt wanted to refuse, to bundle her into the cellar by force if necessary. But looking at her determined face, he recognized a truth: she needed this, needed to face her demons, to fight back against the man who'd tried to cage her. Fine, but you stay inside, away from the windows unless you're shooting. And if I say run, you run, no arguments. She nodded, moving to take position at the east window. The men spread out, some in the cabin, others behind cover outside. Cookie doused the lamps, plunging them into strategic darkness. They didn't have long to wait. The riders appeared as shadows against the stars, spreading into a loose semicircle around the cabin. Colt recognized Pale Eyes in the lead, but the man beside him was unfamiliar. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing expensive clothes even on the trail. "That's him," Lena whispered from her window. "Jacob Harrison." So the man had come himself. Interesting. Either he was very confident or very desperate. "Marlowe?" Harrison's voice carried clear in the night air. "I know you're in there with my property. Send her out, and we all ride away peaceful-like." "The lady's not property," Colt called back. "And she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. I have legal papers, a contract signed by her father. And I have papers saying she's under my protection. Guess we'll let the court sort it out." Harrison laughed. An ugly sound. "Courts. You think this is about law? It's about respect, about keeping promises. The girl belongs to me. I belong to no one." Lena's voice rang out clear and strong. "Through the window." Colt saw Harrison stiffen in his saddle. "Eleanor, sweetheart." Harrison's tone changed, became coaxing. "I know you're confused, frightened. That's natural, but I forgive you. Come home with me, and all's forgotten." "There is no home with you, only a prison. I'd rather die free than live in your cage." "That can be arranged," Pale Eyes muttered, hand drifting to his weapon. It happened fast. Someone's nerve broke. Colt never knew whose. A shot cracked the night, shattering the kitchen window. Then everyone was shooting, muzzle flashes like deadly fireflies in the dark. Colt fired methodically, picking targets, watching Harrison's men scatter for cover. Beside him, Lena's revolver barked steadily. Her face was pale but determined. No trace of panic. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Jim's men proved their worth, their disciplined fire keeping Harrison's hired guns pinned down. But the numbers were still against them, and ammunition wasn't infinite. Then Colt heard it, horses approaching fast from the east. His heart sank. Reinforcements for Harrison. They couldn't hold against more men. But the voice that rang out wasn't one of Harrison's thugs. "This is Deputy U.S. Marshal Frank Morrison. Everyone cease fire immediately." The shooting stuttered to a halt. Men on both sides stayed behind cover, uncertain. Into the sudden silence rode a group of men wearing badges, led by a weathered lawman Colt recognized from his ranger days. "Frank Jim Thornton called. That really you?" "It is. Jim. Got a wire from Judge Mason in Topeka. Something about illegal trafficking of women across state lines." Morrison dismounted, hands visible but near his weapons. "Mr. Harrison, I'll need to see your papers regarding this young woman." "This is none of your concern, Marshal," Harrison snarled. "It's a private matter. Forcing a woman across state lines against her will is federal business. Now, you can show me those papers, or I can arrest you for attempted kidnapping. Your choice." Even in the darkness, Colt could see Harrison's rage. But the man wasn't stupid. Fighting hired guns was one thing, fighting federal marshals was another. "The papers are legal," Harrison said through gritted teeth. Her father had no right to sell another human being. Morrison cut him off. "This is 1879, not 1859. We settled that question with considerable bloodshed, if you recall." "She's my fiancée," I am not. Lena stepped onto the porch, Colt moving quickly to flank her. She stood straight and proud in the lamplight from inside, no longer hiding. My name is Lena O'Brien, she said clearly. I am engaged to marry Colt Marlowe of Rock Hollow, Kansas. This man, she pointed at Harrison, tried to force me into an arrangement I did not consent to. When I refused, he pursued me across state lines with armed men. I demand protection under federal law. Morrison studied her, then nodded. Ma'am, I'll need you to make a formal statement, but based on what I'm seeing here, Mr. Harrison and his men need to withdraw immediately. He turned to Harrison. You are free to pursue any legal remedies through the courts, but if you or your men come within a mile of this woman again, I'll arrest you for harassment and attempted kidnapping. Clear. Harrison's face was purple with rage. This isn't over. You can't hide behind her skirts forever. Marlowe, and you, he pointed at Lena, you'll regret this. No one makes a fool of Jacob Harrison. I didn't make you a fool, Lena replied quietly. You did that yourself when you tried to buy a wife instead of earning one. For a moment, Colt thought Harrison might draw despite the marshals. Then Pale Eyes touched his arm, murmured something. Harrison jerked his horse around. Mount up, he snarled at his men. We're leaving, for now. They rode away in a thunder of hooves and wounded pride. The marshals stayed until they were well gone. Then Morrison approached the cabin. That was a close thing, he said. Judge Mason sends his regards. Colt said to tell you the protective order's been upheld. Miss O'Brien is officially under territorial protection until the matter's resolved. He tipped his hat to Lena. Ma'am, you've got courage. Not many would stand up to a man like Harrison. I had help, she said, glancing at Colt. The best help. After the marshals left, promising to patrol the area for the next week, an exhausted quiet fell. Jim's men maintained their watch, but the immediate danger had passed. In the cabin, Colt and Lena sat at the kitchen table, the broken window letting in cool night air. You didn't have to claim me publicly, Colt said finally. Could have just asked for protection. I wanted to. She met his eyes steadily. When I said your name out there, said I was engaged to you, it didn't feel like a lie anymore. His heart stumbled in his chest. Lena, I know we said it was just strategy, papers and pretense, but somewhere in these 2 weeks, watching you prepare to fight for me, teaching me to fight for myself, it became real, for me, at least. He reached across the table, took her hands in his. They were steady now, no trembling. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that could shoot a gun or tend a garden with equal skill. For me, too, he admitted. When I thought Harrison might hurt you, I realized something. I could survive losing another person I cared about. Did it once, after all. But I couldn't survive not trying to save you, not fighting for you. I'm not asking you to forget Sarah. I'd never... I'm not forgetting her, but I'm not hiding behind her memory anymore either. He squeezed her hands gently. She's part of who I was. You're part of who I'm becoming. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. So, what happens now? Now we make it real. If you're willing, proper courthouse wedding. Nothing to do with protection orders or legal strategies. Just you and me, choosing each other. Even though I come with troubles, even though Harrison might try again. Especially then, we'll face whatever comes together. He stood, pulled her to her feet and into his arms. What do you say? Lena O'Brien, will you marry a broken-down ex-ranger with more past than future? Only if he'll marry a runaway pretend Irish girl with a false name and a talent for trouble. Deal. She laughed, the sound bright as morning. And he kissed her there in the lamp-lit kitchen with its broken window and bullet-scarred walls. It wasn't the romantic proposal Sarah had gotten, all flowers and promises. But it was real, forged in fire and tested by truth. Outside, dawn was breaking over the prairie. A new day, a new beginning. And in a small cabin in Kansas, Two people who'd thought love was behind them discovered it waiting ahead, patient as sunrise, strong as the land itself. The night came without warning. 3 days after the marshals had left, Colt woke to Dusty's low growl, instantly alert. Beside him, Lena stirred. They'd been married 2 days now in a simple ceremony at the Rock Hollow courthouse, and she was still getting used to sharing the bed.
"What is it?"
she whispered. "Don't know. Stay here." He slipped from bed, pulling on trousers and boots. Reaching for the rifle always kept close. The cabin was dark, quiet except for Dusty's continued growling. Through the window, moonlight painted the prairie silver white. Then he smelled it. Smoke. "Fire!" He grabbed Lena's arm as she sat up. "Get dressed. Quick, we need to get out." She didn't waste time with questions. Pulling on her dress and boots with practiced efficiency, Colt grabbed what he could. Ammunition, the cash box, Lena's canvas bag with her mother's photograph. The smoke was thickening, orange light flickering at the windows. They burst onto the porch to find the barn ablaze, flames reaching hungrily toward the star-filled sky. But worse than the fire were the riders, 6 of them, faces covered with bandanas, circling the burning structure. "Harrison's men," Lena breathed. One rider spotted them, raised a rifle. Colt shoved Lena back inside as the shot splintered the door frame. "Out the back window," he ordered. "Make for the creek bed. I'll cover you." "Not without you." "Go!" He fired through the doorway, driving the riders back, then followed her to the bedroom. She'd already gotten the window open, was halfway through. He boosted her the rest of the way, then squeezed through himself, rifle scraping against the frame. They ran, barefoot now despite their boots. Stealth mattered more than comfort. Behind them, shouts arose as the riders realized their quarry had fled. The creek bed was 50 yards away, lined with cottonwoods that would provide cover. 30 yards, 20, hoofbeats thundered behind them. "Down!" Colt tackled Lena into the shallow water as bullets whined overhead. They scrambled behind a fallen log, gasping. "So much for legal remedies," Lena panted. Despite everything, Colt almost laughed. Man like Harrison doesn't give up easy. The riders had spread out, approaching cautiously. 6 against 2, with only Colt's rifle and the revolver Lena had grabbed. Not good odds. Then, impossibly, a familiar voice rang out. "That's far enough, boys." Jim Thornton and his men materialized from the shadows like ghosts. They'd been camped a half-mile away. Seen the fire, come running. The odds had just shifted. "Drop your weapons," Jim commanded. Nice and easy. For a moment, the night balanced on a knife's edge. Then one of Harrison's men made a fatal mistake, swinging his gun toward Jim. The night exploded in gunfire. It was over in seconds. 3 riders down, the others throwing down their weapons, hands high. Colt kept Lena pressed against the log until Jim called the all clear. They emerged to find Pale Eyes among the captured, blood seeping from a shoulder wound. He glared at Colt with undimmed hatred. "Where's Harrison?" Colt demanded. Pale Eyes spat. "Wouldn't dirty his hands, but he sent a message." He grimaced. Whether from pain or satisfaction, Colt couldn't tell. The girl cost him respect, made him look weak. He can't let that stand. So he burns down my home. Just the beginning. He'll keep coming. Different men, different ways. Unless... Pale Eyes trailed off, calculating. "Unless what?" "Unless you face him, man to man, settle it permanent-like." Pale Eyes laughed. A wet sound. "Course, Harrison's no gunfighter, but neither are you, from what I hear. Just a washed-up ranger playing farmer." Lena stepped forward before Colt could stop her. "Tell Harrison he's a coward. Tell him if he wants satisfaction, he can face the woman who rejected him. Unless he's afraid of being beaten by someone he considers property." Pale Eyes stared at her. You're calling him out, you. Why not? He's the one with the grievance. Let him prove he's man enough to take what he claims is his. Her voice was steady, cold as winter wind. Tomorrow, noon. The old Baxter claim, 5 miles north. He can bring 1 second. If he wins, I'll go with him. If he loses, he leaves us in peace forever. Lena, no, Colt started. She turned to him, eyes fierce. This is my fight. Colt, always has been. Time I finished it. Pale Eyes was grinning now, despite his wound. Oh, he'll come. Can't resist a challenge like that. The great Jacob Harrison, called out by a woman. He'll come. Jim's men hauled the prisoners away. Heading for the marshal's office in Dodge, the barn was beyond saving, collapsed into glowing embers. But the cabin had survived, and the horses were safe. They'd been in the far pasture. Inside, Colt confronted Lena. You can't face Harrison. He may not be a gunfighter, but he's killed before. Hunting accidents. They called them... I know. She was checking her revolver, calm as if preparing for a picnic. But I'm done running, done letting others fight for me. This needs to end. Then I'll face him. No. She looked up, green eyes blazing. Don't you see if you fight him? I'm just property being contested between 2 men, but if I face him, if I beat him, then I'm a person defending my own freedom. That matters. He wanted to argue, to forbid it, to lock her in the root cellar if necessary. But looking at her face, he saw the truth. She needed this, needed to face the monster who'd haunted her steps, to prove to herself and the world that she was no man's possession. All right, he said finally. But we do this smart. You've got 10 hours to get ready. They worked through the night. Colt drilled her on everything he knew. Stance, draw, aim, where to place her feet, how to breathe. The mental game of facing another human with death between you. Don't think about killing, he instructed. Think about living, about what comes after. Keep that in your mind. What comes after? She repeated. Our life together. Yes. As dawn broke, word spread through Rock Hollow like wildfire. By the time they reached the Baxter claim, an abandoned homestead with a single dead oak marking the yard, half the town had gathered. Mrs. Murphy was there with several other women, faces grim but supportive. Tom Garrett had brought Doc Williams, just in case. Harrison arrived at noon exactly, dressed in a black suit like he was attending a funeral. Maybe he was. A thin man Colt didn't recognize accompanied him. His second. This is ridiculous, Harrison announced to the crowd. I won't draw on a woman. Then you forfeit, Lena said simply. She stood 20 paces away, wearing the blue dress Colt had bought her, her mother's photograph tucked in the pocket over her heart. Admit I'm not your property and leave. You, little, Harrison caught himself, aware of the watching crowd. Very well, but when you're wounded, when you're begging for mercy, remember you chose this. They took their positions. Judge Mason had arrived from Topeka, serving as the official witness. He raised his hand. This is a legally sanctioned duel under Kansas territorial law. The challenge party has set terms upon conclusion. The winner's decision regarding the disputed engagement stands. Are both parties ready? Ready, Lena said clearly. Harrison just nodded, hand hovering over his pearl-handled Colt. On my count, 3, 2, 1, draw. It happened between heartbeats. Harrison was fast, faster than Colt expected. His gun cleared leather, swung up. Lena's shot took him high in the shoulder, spinning him half around. His own shot went wide, plowing into the dirt. He dropped to one knee, gun falling from nerveless fingers. She held her stance, gun still aimed, smoke wisping from the barrel. Yield. You shot me. Harrison seemed more shocked than hurt. I did, and I'll shoot you again if you don't yield. Her voice was steady as granite. Say it. Say I'm free. Doc Williams started forward, but Harrison waved him off with his good hand. He looked at Lena, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, not as property or prize, but as a person who'd bested him fair and square. "You're free," he said finally. "The engagement is dissolved. I have no claim on you. And you'll leave us in peace, no more hired guns, no more harassment." Yes, the words seemed to physically pain him. "You have my word, such as it's worth." Only then did Lena lower her gun. She walked to where Colt waited, took his hand. Together they watched as Harrison's second helped him to their carriage, Doc Williams following to tend the wound. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's really over." "Thanks to you." He pulled her close, uncaring of the watching crowd. "You were magnificent." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But I remembered what you said. Think about living, about what comes after." She looked up at him. "We can have that now. A real life. No more looking over our shoulders." The crowd began to disperse, people congratulating Lena as they passed. Mrs. Murphy pressed a basket of food into her hands. Tom Garrett offered lumber to rebuild the barn. The community that had once whispered about the strange woman at Marlowe's place now embraced her as one of their own. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie, Lena pulled out her mother's photograph. "She would have been proud," she said softly. "Mama always said a woman should stand on her own feet, fight her own battles when needed. She raised a strong daughter." "She did, but strength alone wasn't enough. I needed someone to believe I was worth fighting for, worth saving." She leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for stopping that day, for seeing me as more than just another body in the dust. Thank you for giving me a reason to care again, for pulling me out of my own dust." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Tomorrow they'd start rebuilding the barn. Next week, Lena wanted to plant a garden where Sarah had planned one. Small steps toward a future neither had imagined possible just weeks ago. "Colt," Lena said suddenly. "What if Harrison doesn't keep his word? What if he comes back? Then we'll face him together. But I don't think he will. You didn't just beat him today. You showed him what he lost by trying to own instead of earn. That's a lesson that sticks." She nodded, settling deeper against him. "Together, then, whatever comes." Whatever comes. Dusty emerged from under the porch, tail wagging, and settled at their feet with a contented sigh. The old dog had the right idea. Colt thought this was home. Not just the cabin or the land, but this moment, this woman, this life they were building from the ashes of their separate sorrows. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate across the darkness. The sound no longer seemed lonely, but hopeful, a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the prairie, no one had to be alone unless they chose to be. And Colt Marlowe, who had chosen solitude and found only emptiness, now chose love and found himself whole again. The night deepened around them, peaceful and full of promise. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did. But tonight, they were together, alive and free. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. The morning after the duel dawned clear and bright, as if the world itself had been washed clean. Lena woke to find Colt already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the prairie gold. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she joined him. "Just thinking." He put an arm around her, drawing her close. "Today's the first day we don't have to look over our shoulders. Feels strange." "Strange, but good." She studied his profile. "Any regrets?" "Only one." He set down his cup, turned to face her fully. "I never properly asked you to marry me. We rushed into it for legal reasons, but you deserve better." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee right there in their small kitchen, taking her hand in both of his. "Lena O'Brien Marlowe, you came into my life like a prairie storm, sudden, powerful, changing everything in your path. You woke me from a 2-year sleep, gave me reason to fight again, to feel again. Will you stay married to me? Not for protection or strategy, but because I love you." Tears ran down her cheeks as she tugged him to his feet. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you too, Colt Marlowe. Not because you saved me, but because you saw me as worth saving." They sealed the promise with a kiss as Dusty barked approval from his corner. Later that morning, Sheriff Daniels rode out with unexpected news. "Thought you should know," he said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Got a telegraph from Jefferson City. Jacob Harrison died in the night." Lena's cup rattled against its saucer. "What, but the wound wasn't that serious?" "Wasn't the wound. Heart gave out. Doc says, apparently, he had a weak ticker, and the stress of yesterday." Daniels shrugged. "His lawyer sent word that all claims against you are withdrawn. His estate goes to some cousin back east who never heard of you and doesn't care." After the sheriff left, Lena was quiet for a long time. Colt found her at Sarah's grave. He'd shown her the spot days earlier, a small hill overlooking the creek. "I didn't mean for him to die," she said softly. "I just wanted to be free." "You didn't kill him. His own pride and stubbornness did that." Colt knelt beside her. "You can't carry guilt for his choices." "I know. It's just—" "He wasn't evil, exactly. Just a man who thought money could buy him anything, even love. That's more sad than anything else." They stayed a while longer, paying respects to both the dead Sarah, who had taught Colt how to love, and even Harrison, whose pursuit had ultimately brought them together. That afternoon, true to their word, neighbors arrived to help rebuild. Tom Garrett brought lumber. The Murphy boys hauled stones for a new foundation. And Mrs. Murphy organized the women in preparing food for the workers. By sunset, the barn frame stood proud against the sky. "Community," Lena marveled, watching their neighbors pack up as darkness fell. "I've never had this before." "You do now. You're one of us, a proper Rock Hollow resident who faced down a bully and won. That carries weight here." As summer deepened, so did their life together. Lena proved to have her mother's green thumb, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn prairie soil. The garden she planted where Sarah had dreamed one would be flourished with tomatoes, beans, and squash. Colt found himself laughing more, the tight knot of grief in his chest finally loosening. Not forgetting, never that, but allowing new joy to grow alongside old sorrow. One evening in July, as they sat shelling peas on the porch, Lena suddenly set down her bowl and rushed to the edge of the porch, retching into the bushes. "That's the 3rd time this week," Colt said, concerned. "Should I fetch Doc Williams?" She straightened, wiping her mouth, a strange expression on her face. "I don't think I need a doctor to tell me what this is." She turned to him, eyes bright with tears and wonder. "Colt, I think I'm with child." The world seemed to stop. A child, after losing Rose, he'd never thought. "Are you pleased?" Lena asked anxiously, misreading his silence. He crossed to her in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet in a fierce embrace. "Pleased I'm terrified and overjoyed and— Lena, are you sure?" "As sure as a woman can be without a doctor's confirmation." "But yes, I think so." She touched his face. "I know about Rose. This isn't meant to replace her." "No." He set her down gently, keeping his hands on her waist. "Not replace, but maybe this is life giving us another chance. Both of us." They saw Doc Williams the next day, who confirmed what they already knew. "About 2 months along, I'd say. You'll want to take it easy. Mrs. Marlowe. Eat well. Rest often." The months that followed were a mixture of joy and anxiety. Colt found himself protective to the point of smothering, until Lena firmly reminded him she'd survived worse than pregnancy. "I walked until my feet bled," she said one day when he tried to stop her from carrying water. "I faced down the man who tried to own me, I think I can handle carrying our child." "Their child?" The words never failed to move him. As autumn arrived and Lena's condition became obvious, the community rallied around them again. Mrs. Murphy knitted blankets. Other women shared advice and remedies. Even crusty old Walter from the telegraph office carved a wooden rattle. One evening in September, almost exactly 3 months after that desperate day when Colt found her in the dust, Lena felt the first movement. "Here," she said, placing Colt's hand on the swell of her stomach. "Wait." There, a flutter, like a bird's wing against his palm. His child, living, moving, real. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your papa. I promise to keep you safe, to teach you to be strong like your mama, to—" His voice broke. Lena covered his hand with hers. "To love them," she finished. "That's all we need to promise, to love them with everything we have." November brought the first snow and increasing worry as Lena's time approached. Doc Williams visited weekly now, pronouncing everything normal. But Colt couldn't shake his fear. He'd lost Sarah and Rose to childbirth fever. The thought of losing Lena— "Stop it," she told him one night, finding him staring into the fire. "I can feel your worry from across the room. I can't help it. If something happens, then we'll face it together. But Colt, I'm not Sarah. This isn't that birth. We can't live in fear of shadows." She took his hands. "I'm strong. Remember I survived Harrison? Survived the prairie. I'll survive this too." She was right, of course. When labor began on a cold December morning, Lena faced it with the same determination she'd shown facing Harrison. Mrs. Murphy came to help, along with Doc Williams, and Colt was firmly banished to the porch. He paced for hours, wearing a path in the new boards, while Jim Thornton tried to distract him with stories. Dusty paced with him, whining softly at Lena's occasional cries from inside. Then, as the sun set over the snow-covered prairie, a new sound cut through the winter air, the vigorous cry of a healthy baby. "Colt, Mrs." Murphy appeared at the door, beaming. "You have a son." He pushed past her, heart hammering, to find Lena propped up in bed, exhausted but radiantly alive, holding a wrapped bundle. "Come meet your son," she said softly. The baby was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair like his father's, and his mother's green eyes already visible. "What shall we call him?" Lena asked. Colt thought of all they'd been through, all they'd overcome. "Thomas," he said finally, "after my brother who died young, Thomas James Marlowe." A strong name for a strong boy. She shifted the baby so Colt could hold him. And in that moment, as his son's tiny hand gripped his finger, something broke and healed inside him all at once. Later, as Lena slept with the baby beside her, Colt stepped onto the porch. The stars were brilliant in the cold, clear sky, and he found himself speaking to them. "Sarah, I hope you understand. I'll never forget you or Rose, but I've been given another chance. I promise to love them, protect them, be the man you always believed I could be." The wind whispered across the snow, and for a moment, he could almost hear Sarah's laugh in it, feel her blessing in the starlight. Spring came early that year, and with it, a letter that would change everything. Lena found it in the mail Tom Garrett delivered, staring at the return address in shock. "It's from a law firm in Boston," she said, "about my mother's family." The letter revealed that Lena's maternal grandfather, whom her mother had been estranged from, had died, leaving his considerable estate to his only grandchild, if she could be found. "I'm an heiress," Lena said faintly. "All those years of father's debts, of scraping by, and I'm an heiress." "What do you want to do?" Colt asked carefully. She looked around the cabin, simple, worn, but filled with love, at their son sleeping peacefully in the cradle Colt had built, at Dusty snoring by the fire, at the man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. I want to use it to build our life here, she said firmly. Better house, more land. Maybe help other women who need to escape situations like mine. But this is home. You and Thomas are my wealth. They used the inheritance wisely, building a proper house with room for the children they hoped would follow Thomas, establishing a fund for women fleeing dangerous situations, investing in the community that had embraced them. But the core of their life remained unchanged. Love, trust, and the knowledge that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. Years later, when Thomas asked how his parents met, they would tell him a simple version: "Your papa found me when I was lost, and we found our way together." It was true enough. The full story, with all its pain and triumph, could wait until he was older. For now, it was enough that he knew he was born of love, love that had survived loss, violence and despair to bloom like a prairie flower in the most unlikely ground. And in the evening, when work was done and the children, 3 more would follow, Thomas were asleep. Colt and Lena would sit on their porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, grateful for the dust and desperation that had brought them together. For in saving each other, they had saved themselves, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with grand gestures or perfect moments, but with simple human kindness, with choosing to stop for someone who needs help, with offering water to parched lips, with saying "you're safe here" and meaning it. The prairie wind still blew, carrying its secrets across the vast land. But for Colt and Lena Marlowe, the secrets it carried now were only of joy, of children's laughter, of love that had conquered fear and bloomed into forever. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The garden flourished that first spring after Thomas's birth, as if the earth itself celebrated new life. Lena worked among the rows of vegetables with the baby secured to her back in a sling Mrs. Murphy had fashioned, humming old Irish melodies her mother had taught her. It was there, kneeling among the bean plants, that she first noticed the woman. A figure stood at the edge of their property, swaying slightly, one hand pressed to her side. Even from a distance, Lena could see the exhaustion in her posture, the desperation in how she clutched a small bundle to her chest. "Colt," she called, but he was in the far pasture with the cattle. Without hesitation, Lena rose and walked toward the stranger. As she drew closer, details became clear. A young woman, perhaps 19, with dark hair escaping from a torn bonnet. Her dress was travel-stained, her face bearing the telltale marks of someone who'd been struck. Blood seeped between the fingers pressed to her ribs. "Please," the woman whispered, then collapsed. The parallel to her own arrival wasn't lost on Lena as she caught the falling woman, easing her to the ground. "It's all right," she murmured. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." By the time Colt arrived, having seen Lena's frantic waving, she'd already begun assessing the stranger's injuries. "Help me get her inside," Lena ordered. "She's been beaten, maybe stabbed. The wound on her side is deep." Colt lifted the unconscious woman carefully while Lena grabbed the bundle she'd been carrying. Not belongings, but a child. A little girl, perhaps 2 years old, who stared up with solemn dark eyes. "Mama," the child whispered. "Mama's going to be fine," Lena soothed, though she wasn't certain it was true. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Mary," came the tiny voice. "Mary Grace." They worked through the afternoon, Colt riding hard for Doc Williams while Lena cleaned and bandaged wounds that told a familiar story. Bruises old and new. Defensive marks on the woman's arms, the knife wound that had barely missed vital organs. "She's lucky," Doc Williams said after his examination. "Another day without treatment and we'd be digging a grave. As it is, if infection doesn't set in, she should recover." The woman, she told them her name was Catherine Holloway, woke the next morning, immediately panicking until she saw Mary Grace playing quietly with Thomas under Lena's watchful eye. "She's safe," Lena assured her. "You both are. No one will hurt you here." Catherine's story emerged in pieces over the following days. A husband who'd seemed charming until after the wedding. Escalating violence, isolation from family. The final straw had been when he'd raised his hand to Mary Grace. "I couldn't let him hurt her," Catherine whispered. "When he came at me with the knife, I fought back, got away while he was drinking. Been walking for days, trying to reach my sister in Colorado." "Colorado's a long way," Colt observed quietly. "I know, but she's all the family I have left. If I could just get to her." Lena exchanged a look with Colt. They'd been blessed with the inheritance, had more than they needed. And hadn't she said she wanted to help women in situations like this? "You'll stay here until you're healed," Lena said firmly. "Then we'll see about getting you to Colorado, safely." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I can't pay you. We're not asking for payment." Lena took her hand. "Someone helped me once when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to pass that kindness on." As Catherine recovered, she proved to be educated and capable, helping with household tasks and showing a talent for sewing that put Lena's rough stitches to shame. Mary Grace bloomed under the attention, following Thomas around like a devoted shadow as he learned to toddle about the expanded house. It was Catherine who first suggested the idea that would reshape their future. "You have room," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. "And the funds. From what you've mentioned, have you thought about making this a proper refuge, a place where women like us could come, stay safe while they heal or make plans?" Lena looked at Colt, saw him nod slowly. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I wasn't sure how to begin." "I could help," Catherine offered. "Before I married, I worked at a charitable house in St. Louis. I know how to organize such things, keep records, manage resources." "You're supposed to be going to Colorado," Colt reminded her. Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I've written to my sister. Her husband doesn't want trouble, doesn't want a runaway wife and child bringing danger to their door." Her voice was steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. "So perhaps I could make myself useful here instead." And so Dust Hollow Ranch became something more than just a home. They built a second house on the property, simple but sturdy, with room for 6 women and their children. Word spread quietly, carefully, through churches, through doctors like Williams who saw the bruises, through women like Mrs. Murphy who remembered their own struggles. They came slowly at first. Anna, barely 18, fleeing a father who'd tried to sell her to pay gambling debts. Margaret, a widow whose brother-in-law claimed ownership of her and her children along with her late husband's farm. Beulah, whose husband had decided she was possessed by demons that required beating out of her. Each woman arrived broken in some way, carrying physical and invisible wounds. Each was met with the same words Lena had first heard: "You're safe here." Colt adapted to a house full of wounded women and children with surprising grace. He taught the older children to ride, helped the women learn to shoot if they wanted, and maintained a protective presence that allowed them to slowly lower their guard. "You're building something important here," Jim Thornton observed during one of his visits. He'd stayed in the area, running cattle and keeping an eye on his old friend's growing operation. "Though you might want to consider hiring some help. Man can't protect a whole ranch full of folks alone." He was right. They hired 2 Hands brothers named Samuel and David Wright, recommended by the marshal as honest men who'd mind their own business and not ask too many questions about the women who came and went. The first real test came 6 months after they'd opened their doors. A man arrived at the gate, well-dressed and smooth-talking, claiming his wife had been kidnapped and brought here. "I demand to see her," he insisted. "Martha belongs at home with her husband." Colt stood firm at the gate while Lena found Martha, a thin woman who'd arrived 2 weeks prior with a broken arm and terror in her eyes. "He's here," Lena said gently. "You don't have to see him. You don't have to go back." Martha trembled but straightened her spine. "I want to tell him myself. I need to." They let her approach the gate, Colt and Samuel flanking her protectively. The change in the smooth-talking man was instant. His face darkened, fists clenched. "Martha, stop this nonsense. Get in the wagon." "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not your property. Robert, I'm staying here until I decide what to do next." "You're my wife." "And you broke your vows the first time you raised your hand to me?" Martha lifted her chin. "I'm done being afraid of you." He lunged for the gate, but Colt and Samuel were ready. It took only moments to subdue him, and the sheriff, pre-warned about the situation, arrived to escort him off the property with a warning about trespassing. Martha sobbed afterward, but they were tears of relief and release. "I stood up to him," she kept saying. "I actually stood up to him." That night, Lena found Colt standing at the window of their bedroom, watching the lights in the refuge house. "Regrets?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "No regrets, just thinking about how different life is from what I imagined." He turned to face her. "When I found you in that road, I thought I was saving one woman. Now look at us, running a whole sanctuary." "Are you happy?" There was genuine concern in her question. He kissed her forehead. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again. We're doing good work here. Lena, necessary work. Even when it's dangerous, even when angry husbands show up at our door. Especially then, every woman who finds safety here, who learns she has worth beyond what others assign her, that matters." He pulled her close. "Besides, I've got help now. Good men who believe in what we're doing." As if to emphasize the point, Thomas toddled in, rubbing sleepy eyes, followed by Mary Grace. Without discussion, they scooped up both children, settling them in the big bed. It had become a common occurrence. The children were as close as siblings. "Tell story," Mary Grace requested, snuggling against Lena. "Which one?" Lena asked, smoothing the child's dark hair. "The one about the lady in the dust." Colt smiled. It had become Catherine's favorite bedtime story for the children, a simplified version of how Colt and Lena met, focusing on kindness and bravery rather than the darker elements. "Once upon a time," Lena began, "a brave cowboy was riding across the prairie when he found a lady who needed help." As she told the story, Colt watched his family, official and unofficial. For Mary Grace was as much theirs as Thomas in every way that mattered, and Catherine had become the sister Lena never had. The refuge housed 4 women currently, each at different stages of their journey. Some would leave eventually, like Catherine had chosen to stay. Others would use it as a way station to somewhere else, somewhere safe to start over. But all of them would carry forward the same message: you are not alone. You are not property. You have worth. It was a different life than the solitary existence Colt had planned when he'd fled to Kansas. Different from the privileged cage Lena had escaped. But it was theirs, built on the ashes of their pain, strengthened by their love, and sustained by their commitment to ensuring others didn't suffer alone. "And they lived happily ever after?" Mary Grace asked as Lena finished the story. "They lived," Lena corrected gently, "with good days and bad days, easy times and hard times. But they lived freely, and they helped others live freely too. And that's the best kind of happily ever after there is." Outside, night settled over Dust Hollow Ranch, in the refuge house. Women slept peacefully for perhaps the first time in years. In the main house, a family born of chance and choice drifted off to sleep, safe in the knowledge that love could indeed conquer fear. And somewhere in the darkness, another woman might be walking, running, escaping, hoping for sanctuary. When she arrived, and they knew she would, eventually, she would find open doors, helping hands, and the promise that her story didn't have to end in that desperate flight. It could begin again, here, in the dust that had given birth to so much unexpected grace. The summer of 1882 brought change to Dust Hollow Ranch in ways no one expected. It started with a letter bearing an official government seal, delivered by a nervous young postal rider who seemed relieved to hand it over and leave. Lena read it twice before passing it to Colt, her hands trembling slightly. They want to recognize us, officially, as a territorial institution for women's refuge. The letter, signed by the governor himself, praised their work and offered territorial funding to expand their mission. It seemed word of their sanctuary had reached all the way to Topeka, carried by grateful women who'd found new lives after leaving their care. "This changes everything," Catherine said, reading over their shoulders. She'd become their unofficial administrator, keeping meticulous records of every woman who passed through their doors. With government recognition comes protection, legitimacy, and scrutiny. She was right. Within weeks, a delegation arrived from Topeka. 2 stern-faced men and a woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Elizabeth Stanton, head of the Territorial Board of Charitable Institutions. "Show me everything." "Mrs." Stanton commanded, her sharp eyes missing nothing as they toured the facilities. "And I mean everything. If the territory is to support this endeavor, we must ensure it meets proper standards." For 2 days, she questioned their methods, reviewed their records, interviewed current residents. Lena found herself holding her breath each time the woman made another note in her leather-bound book. But on the final evening, Mrs. Stanton's stern facade cracked, sitting on the porch, watching Thomas and Mary Grace play with the other children. She spoke quietly. "I was 13 when my mother tried to leave my father. There were no places like this then. No sanctuary. She had nowhere to go. So she stayed." Her voice carried old pain. "What you've built here, it matters more than you know." The official recognition brought challenges alongside benefits. More women arrived, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. They had to build another dormitory, hire more help, establish formal procedures. What had begun as simple human kindness evolved into something larger, more complex. But at its heart remained the same principle: you're safe here. One autumn evening, as the first cold wind swept across the prairie, a familiar figure appeared at the gate. Lena, returning from the garden, stopped short at the sight of the well-dressed woman stepping down from an expensive carriage. It took her a moment to recognize her beneath the fine clothes and careful styling. "Anna?" The young woman who'd arrived 2 years ago, fleeing a father's greed, now stood before them transformed. Gone was the terrified girl. In her place stood a confident woman wearing prosperity like armor. "Mrs. Marlowe," Anna said, then abandoned formality to embrace her. "I had to come back, to show you, to thank you." Over dinner, Anna told her story. After leaving the ranch, she'd made her way to San Francisco, used the skills Catherine had taught her to find work as a seamstress. A chance encounter with a wealthy widow led to a business partnership. Now she ran 3 dress shops and employed a dozen women. Many of them have stories like ours. Anna explained, "I give them work, fair wages, respect. It's my way of passing on what you gave me." She'd brought more than stories. The next morning, Anna presented them with a bank draft that made Lena gasp. "I can afford it," Anna said firmly. "And I know you'll use it well. Consider it an investment in other women's futures." That evening, as they walked among the expanded buildings of their sanctuary, Colt took Lena's hand. "Did you imagine this?" he asked. "When you were running, when you collapsed on that road, could you have imagined your life would become about saving others?" "Never," she admitted. "I was just trying to survive another day. I couldn't see past my own fear." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "But you saw something more in me, even covered in dust and half dead. You saw someone worth saving." "I saw a fighter," he corrected. "Someone who refused to give up. That hasn't changed." A child's laughter drew their attention. Thomas, now 3, was teaching one of the newer children how to feed the chickens, patient as only a child could be with another child's fears. Mary Grace supervised, maternal despite her young years. "They're growing up surrounded by broken people finding their strength," Lena observed. "What kind of adults will that make them?" "Compassionate ones. I hope ones who understand that strength isn't about never falling. It's about helping others get back up. As winter approached, they faced their biggest challenge yet. Word came that a group of territorial legislators wanted to shut them down, claiming the ranch was encouraging wives to abandon their sacred duties. The hearing was set for December. In Topeka, Lena wanted to go alone, but Colt wouldn't hear of it. "We started this together," he said firmly. "We'll defend it together." They arrived at the territorial capital to find the hearing room packed. Some faces were hostile, others curious, but scattered throughout were women Lena recognized, former residents who'd traveled from across Kansas to show support. The opposition spoke first, led by a pompous man named Cornelius Blackwood, who quoted scripture about wives submitting to husbands and painted the ranch as a den of rebellion against natural order. When Lena's turn came to speak, she stood slowly, aware of every eye upon her. In her hand, she held a worn leather journal. "This book," she began, "contains the names of every woman who's found shelter at Dust Hollow Ranch. 237 names in 3 years. But they're more than names. They're stories. Stories of survival against odds that would break the strongest among us." She opened the journal. Sarah Coleman, age 22, arrived with a broken jaw and twin infants, now runs a bakery in Wichita, supports her children alone. Margaret Foster, age 31, came to us with whip marks on her back, treated like property on her own farm, now owns that farm free and clear, employs 3 hired hands. Anna Dawson, aged 19, was to be sold to pay her father's debts, now owns 3 successful businesses in San Francisco. She looked up from the journal. "Gentlemen, you speak of sacred duties. I ask you what duty requires a woman to accept broken bones, what scripture demands she watch her children cower in fear, what natural order insists she be property rather than person. The ranch doesn't encourage women to abandon anything except abuse. We offer them what this great nation promises all its citizens, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Nothing more, nothing less." The room erupted in arguments, but the chairman called for order. More testimonies followed. Doc Williams speaking of the injuries he'd treated. Sheriff Daniels confirming the ranch had reduced domestic violence in Rock Hollow. Mrs. Stanton delivering a forceful endorsement. But the most powerful moment came when Catherine stood to speak, quietly, with dignity that commanded attention. She told her story. The room fell silent as she described her journey from victim to survivor to advocate. "Dust Hollow Ranch saved my life," she concluded, "not just by sheltering me, but by showing me I had worth beyond what others assigned me. Now I help run it because I believe every woman deserves that chance." The vote, when it came, was closer than comfortable but decisive. The ranch would continue, with full territorial support. On the journey home, Colt found Lena staring out the train window at the passing prairie, tears on her cheeks. "What's wrong? We won." "I was thinking about that day," she said softly. "When you found me, I had nothing, no hope, no future, no reason to keep going except stubborn refusal to quit. And now," she gestured helplessly, "now I have everything. A husband who sees me as an equal, children who'll grow up knowing women have value, a purpose that matters." "You always had value," Colt said firmly. "I just helped you find a safe place to remember it." They returned to find the ranch in celebration. The women had prepared a feast. The children had made welcome banners, and even stoic Samuel Wright was seen to smile. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch had settled into peaceful quiet, Colt and Lena walked to the hill overlooking their domain. The buildings spread below them, the main house, the 2 dormitories, the barn and outbuildings, all proof of what love and determination could build. "I need to tell you something," Lena said suddenly, "something I've never said, not even to you." Colt waited, patient as always. "That day on the road, when I collapsed, I'd given up, not just on escaping Harrison, but on life itself. I couldn't take another step, and I didn't want to." She turned to him, starlight reflecting in her eyes. "You didn't just save me from the sun and thirst. You saved me from despair. You gave me a reason to take another breath, another step, another chance." He pulled her close, feeling the truth of her words in his bones. "We saved each other. I was dead inside when I found you, just going through the motions of living. You brought me back to life as surely as I brought you back from that road." They stood together, watching clouds drift across the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more women seeking shelter, more battles to fight, more lives to rebuild. But tonight, they had this each other, their family, their purpose. "Colt," Lena said after a long silence. "Yes. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me as more than just another body in the dust." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, lavender soap now, instead of prairie dust. "Thank you for having the courage to be saved, and for saving me right back." Below them, a lamp flickered in one of the dormitory windows, perhaps a new arrival unable to sleep, unaccustomed to safety. Tomorrow, Lena would sit with her, share her own story, offer the same promise that had been offered to her. "You're safe here. You have worth. You can begin again." It was a promise born in dust and desperation, strengthened by love and determination, and proven by every woman who'd walked through their gates broken and left whole. As they made their way back to the house, Dusty emerged from the shadows to walk beside them, tail wagging despite his advancing years. The old dog had witnessed it all, from that first desperate day to this moment of quiet triumph. Inside, their children slept peacefully, surrounded by the love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. And throughout the ranch, women who'd thought their stories were over discovered they were just beginning new chapters. All because one summer day in 1879, a cowboy chose compassion over convenience, and a desperate woman found the courage to trust one more time. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the echoes of all the stories that had unfolded here. Stories of pain transformed to purpose, fear conquered by love, and the simple, revolutionary act of treating every person as worthy of dignity and respect. At Dust Hollow Ranch, that wasn't just an ideal, it was a promise kept daily, one life at a time. And so she healed, they all healed, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening while driving, relaxing at home, or perhaps during your work? Please share your thoughts in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this story meant to you. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who might need to hear a tale of hope and redemption. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners,